I now have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Bill Wringe. His permanent appointment is at Bilkent University in Turkey, but he is currently an honorary visiting professor at the University of Leeds. He has, York, I'm sorry. You got a degree from Leeds. I've been reading his little bio and I got confused. So he's works in both social, collective intentionality kinds of things. He's also published a good deal on punishment. He works in philosophy of mind. So he's a pretty general all-round hitter, and I'm not going to use up any more of your time. So take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you very much, Jeremy and Ronald, and I have a longer-standing debt to Jeremy, because the way I got interested in this was by being invited to contribute to a symposium on Jeremy's book on Sellars' ethics, and I've been sort of thinking about some of these issues ever since. So if you don't like what I've got to say, it's not my fault. It's all his fault. So it's been nice to sort of hear during the past sort of couple of days sort of some of the things where I thought that what I might think about Sellars was a bit crazy, but at least I'm learning that sort of if that is crazy, I'm not alone in my craziness. So what I want to say by way of introduction is, there's an increasing literature on Sellars' ethics, and most of it seems to concentrate either on the sort of machinery of we intentions or the sort of metaethical implications of it. And there's not very much written, I would say, on the sort of substantive ethics. And that might be because sort of, it doesn't look especially interesting. Sellars argues for a version of aggregative consequentialism. There's nothing sort of particularly new about that. So what's there to discuss? So what I want to do is try and say something about the substantive ethics. I want to argue that Sellars doesn't give us a good reason for being aggregative consequentialists, but I want to say a little bit more. I want to sort of argue that he should have stuck to his Kantian guns. And I'm going to try and get a bit more payoff than that. So I think Kirk already mentioned that sort of at the end of the presentation of sort of Sellars' ethics in Science and Metaphysics, it's there's a bit where Sellars sort of seems to sort of despair of getting to some categorical we intentions. He says, here's how the argument would have to go. I'm happy with premise 1, but premise 2 doesn't work. And I'm going to suggest that if he hadn't gone the consequentialist way, maybe premise 2 there might have been a way of arguing for premise 2 that made it look a little bit more plausible. So, okay, let's get started. Some of this is going to be fairly familiar. As you all know, in Science and Metaphysics, Sellars uses a theory of non-distributive we intentions to develop a Kantian-inspired account of the nature of morality, using the machinery of we intentions, and a consequentialist account of the content of morality. It may be that sort of later on he sort of avoids the consequentialist. He introduces some sort of Kantian thoughts about the separateness of persons. I'm going to argue that that's not Kantian enough. Sort of thinking in sort of welfarist terms is part of the problem here. I should also say that sort of, a lot of my ideas here have been sort of developed in discussion with my former colleague at Bilkent, now at Bursachi University, Lucas Thorpe. And all I'm going to say is that if you think that I'm too Kantian, you should go away and read Lucas's recently published paper in Kantian, which is even more Kantian. I think it's a very good paper. What are the key ideas in both science and metaphysics and our reasoning about values? Sellars has got a non-distributive account of we intentions. That's to say, I think, that he wants an account on which it's intelligible for me to say, we intend to be, but I don't. And I think, but I think this is controversial, there's a sort of story about what you might call local morality as being the expression of we intentions of a particular community, and then a sort of claim about what you might think of as rational morality as involving the we intentions of members of a community of all rational beings. Sellars wants to build his account by thinking about what he thinks of as categorically valid intentions, intentions that any agent must have. He gives us an example, let me live a satisfying life. And his account of what rational morality involves is that it's going to be the categorically valid we intentions of a member of a community of all rational beings. Okay, so one question you might ask about, and I'm just going to say that this is a question, is there a coherent notion of non-distributive we intentions for Sellars to use here? There's obviously a big literature on this, but I'm going to assume that most people in this room are sort of more or less sympathetic to, if not committed to, the idea that, there's something there. A worry that people might have more, where there may be more qualms about the idea of a community of all rational beings. One thought you might have about the community of all rational beings, it's got to be potentially open-ended across space, across time. If there are rational beings on Alpha Centauri or something like that, presumably they're going to be members of the community of all rational beings. And one thought that you might have about that is whether, if you have sort of widely scattered rational beings across time and space, and they're sort of so situated that maybe they can't communicate with one another, maybe the laws of nature make it impossible to communicate with one another. Can we think of them as being, in any sense, a community? Can we think of them as the kinds of things that could intend certain things on behalf of the community as a whole? So Sellars is sort of explicitly Kantian, so maybe there are some sort of Kantian moves he can make in response. Maybe he can move the whole community to the noumenal realm, right? Okay. Once we've moved to the noumenal realm, we don't have to worry about time and space. I don't think he's going to be happy to do that. That sort of seems like it might be in conflict with a commitment to naturalism. But maybe if we don't want to follow Sellars in his naturalism, maybe that might be one thing that we want to do. An alternative possibility, I think, sort of suggested by Heath White yesterday, but it had also occurred to me as a possibility, is to think of the idea of a community of all rational beings not as an established fact, but as something analogous to a postulate of pure practical reason, something that we're committed to taking seriously if morality is to make sense to us. Okay. Well, what's the fundamental worry here? The fundamental worry is many accounts of we intentions are going to presuppose some kind of mechanism of coordination. To have sort of things being common knowledge between members of the community, or you know, sort of Margaret Gilbert's account involves us sort of, you know, jointly committing to things in ways that seem to involve sort of awareness of you know, what one another is doing and so on. You know, once we try to expand the community of all rational beings as widely as it might be expanded in time and space, it's not so clear that lots of these accounts are going to be good ones for us. But it seems to me that there are still accounts that will be okay for us. Maybe something like sort of an account of the sort put forward by Scott Shapiro that has us sort of acting in accordance with a shared plan, or maybe something like the account that Kurt Ludwig put forward this morning. What sort of seems to be sort of significant in these accounts is that we don't seem to need to have, I think this is true on Kirk's view, I'm not quite sure how he understands the notion of us collectively having, no, sorry, I'm not sure what he means when he talks about us having a shared plan. I take it that that's a sort of, we don't have to think of it as a shared plan. It's good enough if it actually is a shared plan. But I'm not sure about that. Okay. Anyway, these are some worries about the sort of formal side of Sellars' account, but that's not where sort of the main focus of my interest is today, so I want to move on from that as quickly as possible, having acknowledged that there's some things to talk about there. I want to sort of talk a little bit about Sellars' consequentialism, and what he seems to do is to make two claims about categorically valid intentions. He's got the idea that for each rational agent, may my life go well, that's an intention that you have to have. And then he thinks of, at least in the sort of earlier presentation in Science and Metaphysics, may our welfare be maximized as a categorical we intention. As Jeremy said in our reasoning about values, it goes slightly differently. Okay, so if you put it as bluntly as that, that might sort of remind you of a very famously bad line of argument. So think about J.S. Mill. The only proof that something is visible is that people see it. The only proof that something is desirable is that people desire it. Each person's happiness is desirable to that person because desired, so the aggregate happiness is desirable to all. G. Moore, with his famous capacity for sort of saying something that doesn't address the point, sort of worries that Mill is making a sort of illicit move from what's desired to what's desirable. But suppose we grant to Mill that each person's happiness is not only desirable to that person, but desired by that person. The real problem seems to be not the move from desired to desirable, but the aggregation. Mill seems to be thinking that the following move is justified. If A wants X, and B wants Y, and C wants Z, A, B, and C together want X, Y, and Z. And if we could read that in a non-distributive way, that would give Mill much of what he wants. Maybe not everything. Maybe you don't get an argument for maximization if you think that Mill's interested in maximization. That would require happiness to come in degrees proportional to desirability, but it still gives you the idea of the general happiness as something that's desirable to all. Okay. One problem with sort of that is, what if X and Y and Z altogether isn't a coherent possibility? Okay. bigger problem, though, is the general, the desirable to all. Where do we get, on Mill's account, what looks as though it's a collective subjective desire? All of us together wanting this. Well, I don't have much to say about Mill, but you might think Sellars' notion of a collective, of a we intention is a way of trying to sort of shove that problem out of the way. But we've still got a problem about aggregation. In the intrapersonal case, you can't simply aggregate intentions. So if it's true that I intend to A and it's true that I intend to B, it needn't necessarily be the case that I intend to do both A and B. I intend to feed my cats as soon as I get home, and I also intend to cook dinner the moment that I arrive home. What I don't intend is both to feed my cats the moment I get home and to cook dinner before I do anything else. I don't intend to do that because there's no such thing as intending to do that. Okay, now you might say, okay, Bill, the problem here is something has gone wrong cognitively. And of course I agree with that. Right, okay. But it seems to me that we can't say that something's gone wrong logically, right? Okay. Why not? Well, it seems as though the problem is I've committed myself to incompatible plans. And what do we want to say about that? It seems to me that we want to say, don't get committed to incompatible plans is good advice. Right? Okay. But the thing about good advice, as I tell my students, is no matter how good the advice is, there's always the logical possibility, often more than just the logical possibility, of you not following it. So, don't get committed to incompatible plans is a piece of advice that I can fail to follow. I can, in fact, get committed to incompatible plans. I can, in fact, intend to do two things that are incompatible with one another, so I can fail to intend A and B. Okay, all right. That's a commonplace. But if that's true in the intrapersonal case, we should also expect it to be true in the interpersonal case. I intend to A, you intend to B. It needn't entail that we intend to A and B. Obviously, we can be ignorant. Our intentions can be incompatible. We can even, even if we want to be, we can make bad plans. I intend to go to one cinema, you intend to go to another cinema, we intend to do this together, but one thing we don't intend is for each of us to go to different cinemas. Okay. It's not even true that if I intend that we do something together and you intend that we do something together, it need not imply that we intend to do this together. So Michael Bratman's famous example, I intend that we go to New York together, you intend that we go to New York together, but you intend that we go with me tied up in the boot of your car, whereas I intend that we take the train together. It's not true, I think, that we together intend to. Okay. So you might worry that Sellars' argument relies on similar forms of illegitimate aggregation. Maybe aggregation failures involve a failure of rationality, but as I've suggested, that doesn't seem to be quite good enough. Okay, so there's a better idea, obviously. And the idea involves the idea that there are intentions that are constitutive of certain kinds of community. And the thought is that there might be intentions that are constitutive of the community of all rational beings. So On a first reading, it looks as though Sellars is saying, it's constitutive of belonging to a community that I be committed to doing my part in advancing that community's aggregate welfare. And if that was a defensible view, then Sellars would get what he wants. It's constitutive of my belonging to a community of rational beings that I'm committed to advancing the aggregate welfare of the community. But it seems to me that's a very implausible claim. So take Sellars' example of the Society for Preserving Sandpipers, and imagine my rival, Professor X. Now, it may well be that it's constitutive of our membership of this society, that we each have a commitment, we intention to promote the goals of the society. And it may be that if Professor X's flourishing is a necessary condition of the success of the society in advancing its goals, I'm thereby implicitly committed to promoting Professor X's welfare. But in the absence of any such condition, it's hard to see why I must be so committed, even if maximizing Professor X's welfare is integral to the project of maximizing the welfare of the society's members as a whole. My membership of the Society for Preservation of Sandpipers seems entirely compatible with a commitment to thwarting Professor X at every turn in any endeavor that does not bear on the preservation of sandpipers. We've all had colleagues for whom I'm sure we are Professor X. We've all had colleagues like Professor X. And woe betide Professor X if his death and destruction is necessary to the success of the sandpiper preservation cause. Anyway, in the absence of some connection between his welfare and the constitutive aims of the society, it's hard to see why I should be committed to maximizing his welfare. Of course, matters would be different if we were members not of the Society for Preserving Sandpipers, but the members of the Society for Maximizing Society members' welfare. Okay? Now it seems as though Professor X's membership in the Society does give me reason to be committed to Professor X's welfare. But there's no obvious reason, as far as I can see, to take the Society for the Preservation of Sandpipers to be, even implicitly, the Society for the Preservation of Sandpipers and the maximization of one another's welfare. It might instead be the Society for the Preservation of Sandpipers and trolling one's rivals. Okay, so much for communities that have constitutive goals. It's far from obvious that every community must have constitutive goals, but even where it does, it's not obvious that those constitutive goals must include a commitment to maximizing the welfare of its members. And it may have, as in the Society for Preserving Sandpipers and trolling one's rivals, have constitutive goals which are incompatible with it. Okay. What to think then? Well, okay, there's a better suggestion. It's constitutive of belonging to a community with constitutive goals that I be committed to advancing the constitutive goals of that community. Need all communities have constitutive goals? Well, let's ignore that. Let's think about what the constitutive goals of the community of rational beings be. Is it a constitutive goal of a community of rational beings that their welfare be maximized? I take it that Sellars thinks yes. But it's not at all clear to me why that has to be the case. So here's one thing. I mean, it's not clear to me that a rational being has to sort of conceive of their life in welfarist terms at all. Right? They may have a bunch of projects that they're committed to, but they might not see all of those projects as in some way contributing to an overall goal of welfare or happiness or something like that. They may think that happiness is too indeterminate to serve as a goal of any sort. Now, that might be a mistake, right? I'm sure there are going to be sophisticated, welfarist, defenders of welfarist accounts of well-being. The point is, you might be mistaken, but you're not necessarily irrational if you don't accept an account of that sort. Okay. So it seems to me that, rather than thinking in terms of welfare or aggregate welfare, the most that a member of a community of rational beings is concerned of, is committed to, is perhaps the idea of a bunch of projects. So maybe what we can think of as the categorical I intention is, may my project succeed. Okay. So, okay. Suppose we start from there. What could Sellars say next instead of going the maximizing route? Well, here's something that it seems plausible to say. If I'm a rational being, any we intentions I have should, I think, give rise to I intentions of the form, let me carry out my role in advancing our we intentions. Okay. And in particular, that'll be true if there are any categorically valid we intentions. So if I'm rational, I must intend as follows. Let my projects be compatible with my doing my part in advancing our categorical we intentions. And also, let the success of my projects be compatible with the realization of our categorical we intentions. Okay. So, plausible candidates for a categorical we intention should harmonize with my intending as in for, but also plausibly, since all I've said about me is I'm one rational being among any, it should harmonize with each individual intending as in for. Okay, so here's a candidate for a categorical we intention that meets this criterion. Let each of our individual projects be compatible with our collective projects. Okay. Well, if that were a categorical we intention, it would entail this. Let each of our individual projects be compatible with this very intention. And since each of our individual projects is supposed to be compatible with one intention, they've got to each be compatible with one another. And since it's got to be a community of all rational beings, it's got to be the case that, that this is compatible with any rational beings being a member of the community. So, as far as I can see, the only way you're going to have that is if you have the following as a categorical we intention. Let each of our projects be compatible with everybody else having the same project. Okay, so we've got a conditional conclusion here, and it should look fairly familiar. It should look like Kant's formula of the universal law. That's a kind of test, right? Okay. Yeah. That's a criterion that something's got to meet in order to be a categorical we intention. Okay. If there are any categorical we intentions, then they're constrained by you. Okay. Now, as I sort of hinted, Lucas Thorpe thinks you can get more out of that. He thinks you can get not just the idea of a law, but the idea of a legislator. Okay, now, maybe there's the sort of Danielle Macbeth worry that this is going to end up too too formalist, but yeah, my hope is that it at least avoids her kind of provincialism objection. Okay, so into the home straight. Okay, the argument put forward so far is a conditional one. It says if there are any categorical we intentions, here's something that must be true of them, but need there be any? So here's what Sellars says. He suggests that theoretical inquiry presupposes the idea of a community of rational inquirers, and he says, to think of oneself as a rational being is implicitly to think of oneself as subject to epistemic oughts binding on rational beings generally. And the intersubjective intention to promote epistemic welfare implies the intersubjective intention to promote welfare sans phrase. These premises would entail that the concept of oneself as a rational being implies the concept of oneself as a member of an ethical community consisting of all rational beings. Sellars says he thinks the first premise is defensible, and I take it that that's because he thinks of epistemic norms as being required for an epistemic community, and he thinks of those as we intentions relating to a community of inquirers. They're, as it were, intentions about how a community of inquirers should regulate itself. So, yeah, let's give him that for the moment. Okay, Sellars says, yeah, I can't see any way of how to defend premise B. You know, why should my commitment to the epistemic welfare of the community commit me to the advancing the welfare, the success in non-epistemic terms of other members of the community? So, does it help if we stop seeing things in terms of welfare, so that rather than a commitment to maximizing the welfare of other members of the epistemic community, I just have a commitment to the success of their projects? Well, you might well think that even that is a step too far, right? Yeah. Why should I be, just because I'm committed to engaging in a project of collective inquiry, why should I be committed to the success of non-epistemic projects of other members of that community? So just dropping the sort of commitment to sort of thinking in terms of welfare doesn't give Sellars what he wants. But what I think is, yeah, the formulation that I've given you, that does seem to be something that doesn't require commitment to the success of non-epistemic projects. It just entails a commitment to avoiding projects that are incompatible with the existence of a community of inquirers. And if I'm committed by engaging in inquiry to the existence of a community of inquirers, then it doesn't seem unreasonable to think that I'd better also be committed to not undermining the existence of such a community. So it seems to me that now you've got a much weaker second premise, and my suggestion is Sellars might have a lot more success in defending that weaker second premise, that I'm committed to not undermining the existence of a community of inquirers, and that might give him something that would look like a categorical we intention. Okay.
So I didn't get it at the end. So these two premises, the intersubjective intention, epistemic welfare. Well, so the first one, to think of oneself as rational is implicitly think of oneself as subject to epistemic oughts binding on all rational beings generally. And then the thought is the intersubjective intention to promote epistemic welfare implies the intersubjective intention to promote welfare sans phrase. I mean, the sense in which we're promoting epistemic welfare seems to be that one recognizes that one's subject to epistemic oughts that bind generally, but that's not the same thing as promoting other people's epistemic welfare. So there's already seems to be a gap there. But even if we granted that, even if we grant the weaker reading where we substitute for welfare that you not interfere with other people's non-epistemic projects, why would that follow from something about being bound by epistemic oughts like all other rational agents?
So I guess the thought is if we think that epistemic norms are going to be the norms of a community of inquirers, then I'd better be committed to the existence of that community of inquirers. And so I'd better be in line, I'd better stick to any constitutive goals that has. But if it's going to have any constitutive goals at all, then it looks as though I'd better be able to be, it'd better be the case that any projects that I have don't undermine the existence of that community, okay? And that's going to have to be true for every member of the community. So it's going to have to be true, I think, that any intentions that I have are compatible with other members of the community intending in the same kind of way. And that looks, because I'm just one rational being among any, right? If it's okay for me to have this intention, then it's going to have to be okay for other members of the community to have that intention. So that's what I think you can get much more plausibly than a commitment to maximizing welfare.
Just seems so there's supposed to be a practical reason for me to promote people's projects if I want to be a member of an epistemic community, but that seems entirely a matter of what the power relations are. You know, if I'm in a position of power and I give people incentives to, participate in whatever projects are required to maintain an epistemic community, I could just flout all sorts of moral rules completely rationally.
So I don't think that I said, I think Sellars wants a commitment to promoting. Yeah, but I don't, my account doesn't have one where I promote their projects, right?
A fortiori, I can, flout all sorts of moral rules.
I just have projects that are compatible with everybody else having the same projects, right? Okay. So, if you've got some project of domination, right? Okay. I'm not committed to having no projects that undermine that project of domination, right? Okay. I'm just committed to making sure that my projects are compatible with you having some projects that are compatible with the existence of the community. Yeah? You might have to change your projects in order for that community to succeed, right? So I think that Sellars is committed to something like the position you find problematic. And what I'm trying to do is find a way of making him committed to something much weaker than that.
Maybe this actually follows on quite nicely. I'm worried about the idea that everybody's projects have to be compatible with everybody else's, because some projects are inherently not compatible. What if my project's to get a gold medal at the Olympics or to become president of the United States? Many people have, more than one person has each of those projects, and only one person can actually realise them. So I was just wondering sort of what your response to that is, or how you deal with that within the framework.
Right, okay, so I mean, that seems to be like a standard worry for sort of Kantian account morality. And, you know, there are a bunch of standard responses to that. So I think about if I'm really a Kantian, I shouldn't have the project of winning no matter what cost. I should have the project of winning subject to my being the best competitor or something like that. And of course, that's a project that each of us can have. Yeah, so I think, you know, yeah. If you're, you know, your Kantian giving an advice to the British Olympic team, you have to say, yeah, you can't be committed to winning at all costs. You've got to be committed to something that everybody else can be committed to.
My question might be along the same lines. Right at the end, is your view that I have to avoid projects that are incompatible with the existence of a community of epistemic inquirers, or I have to avoid projects that are incompatible with a community, period?
I think, well, it depends where you put the quantifiers in, right? Okay. So I don't think I have to be committed only to projects that are compatible with the existence of any old community, but there's some community of which it's true that my commitments have to be compatible with its existence. Okay. Namely, the community of rational inquirers.
Okay.
I'd bet if I'm a member of that community and I'm rational, I'd better be, if we accept Sellars' account of epistemic normativity, committed to that community.
Okay, so my worry is that there's a lot of morality that this doesn't cover, leaves on the table.
Yep.
So for example, let's say I'm working at my university and I say it's a community of rational inquirers and I want that to go forward, but I also want to extort everyone's money and sleep with all their wives. But I haven't undermined the epistemic community exactly. They're still, you know, producing papers and such.
Right, okay, so I take it that, you know, what has got to be compatible, what has got to be the case is that not just that everything that I intend be compatible with, you know, that community meeting its epistemic goals, but that community meeting the other goals that it can have as a community of rational inquirers, right? And I take it that it might have, yeah, there are going to be some non-epistemic goals that it can have that have also got to be compatible with you, right? Okay. So I take it that what you get is something like Kant's formula of the universal law, right? Okay. So all the community of rational inquirers does is give you reason for thinking that there are some categorical we intentions, right? Okay. It doesn't provide any of the content of morality. Now, you might say, well, look, you know, I've still got this Hegelian worry that, you know, you don't get any real content to morality. You know, you just get this kind of Kantian formalism, right? Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've got a solution to that problem, right? Okay. But, you know, well, I'd say two things. I mean, that wasn't the problem that I was sort of trying to solve, right? I mean, you know, any more than I think it would be useful if you sort of, if you thought that Sellars had a case for aggregative consequentialism. You know, I don't think it would be that helpful to say, but look, you know, we don't want to be aggregative consequentialists for the following kinds of reasons. Okay. I do think that there might be more that you could say in response to the formalism worry. And there, I think, the way you'd want to go is see if you could get out of this not just a commitment to something like Kant's formula of universal law, but something like a commitment to us each being a legislator in the kingdom of ends, or something like that. Now, you know, my colleague Lucas Thorpe, my former colleague Lucas Thorpe, thinks you can get that as well, okay? But I think whether or not he's right about that, that seemed like more than it was reasonable to consider in one 40-minute paper. So, yeah, I agree that, yeah, if you've got qualms about whether this account is going to give you a full account of morality, that's reasonable. But it gets you something.
Thanks, Bill. So, according to you, should have said that let my projects go well is a categorically valid intention. Now, to me, it doesn't really look like an intention. That sounds more like a hope or a prayer or something like this. But maybe we could put it as I intend to live well, something like this. As far as living is activity, I want to do well in life. I want to live well. So if that's, and I'm not sure if that's your concept of intention, especially since you talked about incompossible intentions, being head by the same subject. I'm sure it happens often, but it cannot be consciously held, because as soon as you become aware that, well, I made the plan to feed the cat first, and then I made the plan to do something else first, if you're aware of this in the right way, self-conscious of it, you don't know what it is you intend. It's like with belief. You cannot consciously hold occurrent contradictory beliefs. Rather, these are situations where you don't know what to believe, and the question is open again. So, and this also sheds a light on the group case. So if we have incompossible intentions and we become in discussion, we become aware of this, we don't know what it is that we intend. It's not that we intend two different things, but rather the issue is open again. So if that's what you mean, so I want to live well, and that's categorical, so maybe it's transcendental or something, you have to want to do well, whatever it is you're doing. But why not say then, okay, here is a categorical intention for you. We want to live well together.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first thing that I want that I had in the paper but then chopped out is I think we'd better be careful about what our conception of life is here, right? So life had better not be conceived of as sort of something biological. It's got to be a biographical conception of life. Well, so I think sort of Ronald Dworkin has this nice sort of distinction between life in the sense of bios, you know, the kind of thing that's recounted in a biography, and life in the sense of zoe, what any living organism has. Okay. Now, I think there's a further question to be asked about how to unpack the idea of bios, and I would say that's about, at a minimum, having a bunch of projects that can either go well or go badly. Right, okay. So now, something you then said that there's something odd about the intention, having the intention that my projects go well. And I agree that it's odd. I agree that it's an unusual kind of, you know, almost sort of limiting case of an intention. I do want to say, you know, I think there's something sort of a bit Aristotelian about it. So I think it's the kind of thing that, you know, in